Hello and welcome to the Healthcare Today podcast. Our guests this week are Dr. Sheila Bond, Wolters Kluwer's Director of Clinical Content Strategy, and Christian Cella, Vice President and General Manager of Wolters Kluwer Health's International segment. As we stand at the precipice of a massive information transition, the era of artificial intelligence, the very nature of knowledge is shifting. It's becoming dynamic, fluid, and context-dependent. This raises an urgent question. In a world where AI can generate answers in seconds, how do we ensure that the knowledge we act on is still trustworthy? Joining me today are two leaders who are at the heart of this work, and as we discuss AI, knowledge, integrity, and how a 100-year-old company like Wolters Kluwer has seen this wave coming, they'll walk us through the risk, the promise, and the practical path forward. Christian, from Wolters Kluwer's perspective, having seen 100 years of history, how does this AI transition compare to previous technological shifts in medical knowledge, from paper to digital records? Is AI such a marked shift?
Yeah, this is a very good question. As you rightly say, from Wolters Kluwer standpoint, we have supported health professionals for many years and to provide clinical decision support, learning support along their journey, their workflow with different means. And the technology has evolved dramatically in the last 30 years, but this last shift is probably the highest speed shift that we have observed. So I think we can see this last shift on two sides. In a way, I think has been very interesting how usually healthcare industry are quite a laggard, or they're adopting new technology as one of the last industry because there are a lot of safety concern. And in this case, probably for the first time, are sort of a faster adopter in the curve of adoption of AI after the usual consumer sector. So very big change versus the past. On the other hand, we do see also similarity with previous shift. We can think about internet or moving, as you said, from paper to digital. I think the most close is the shift to internet information and available information. So even in that change, there was a first wave of everybody, both clinician and patient, sort of going to Dr. Google. Now it's Dr. ChatGPT or Dr. Claude. And then there was sort of a rebound to trying to understand what was a safe and trust information. And so there was a reset of what was really important to consult to support your decision. So I think still to see how that rebound is happening, but we do start seeing that most of our users and buyers are start considering that very seriously.
Sheila, you've spent 22 years in evidence-based medicine. How, for you, has the concept of evidence evolved, and how is AI challenging our fundamental understanding of what true or valid means?
That's a wonderful question. Yes, I think in my work here at Wolters Kluwer, or just in medicine in general, a lot has been about making sure that the knowledge that we give to our medical students, to others, to our users is actually valid and sound. And I think in medicine, right, the history certainly goes beyond my 22 years in that regard. I think evidence-based medicine, first randomized trial was back in 1948 with the British Medical Council over, streptomycin and its use. And I think pre that era, people were acting on sound information and making good, plausible decisions individually. And over the course of the 70 years since then, we've really put together a discipline of evidence-based medicine, which means what study is appropriate for making a clinical claim, how that methodology is valid, and what specifically can be applied to what patient scenario. And that's what we do intensely in our work, whether it's creating something via AI or whether it's creating our traditional content. And this era is truly, in my mind, having not only been in medicine, but having studied philosophy and transitions of knowledge from one era to the next. I think this is a true epistemic shift, right? It's going to very much change how people receive information and how they think cognitively and how they reason and support them in an entirely different way. I think the one thing that's really important to safeguard in this is what valid is. And I think that is both the beautiful potential of the era and the transition that we're at, as well as the risk. So we're almost back to the start of, pre-evidence-based medicine, where something that is an AI system will produce a very pleasing, plausible answer, and an individual can act on that. So the transition for us is as we actually create clinical AI systems that produce knowledge and clinical claims, are we preserving what makes knowledge valid within that? Or are we simply producing an answer that helps someone with their workflow or be more efficient or that is speedy? Because I think the key thing that we've learned in this transition and through the field of evidence-based medicine is that an individual isn't enough, right? The abundance of medical literature, the complexity of it, the complexity of patient care is such that we needed a field, we needed a discipline so that it really takes a multitude of perspectives to really interpret even a single paper and how it should be contextualized for use. So, as we look at any AI system out there or anything that's producing knowledge, I think we have to look at its foundational attributes and is it designed simply to produce an answer that sounds great and is leaving the responsibility and the discipline of evidence-based medicine to an individual, or is it preserving what in a system is required to ensure that what comes out is actually knowledge that you should act on. So I think the best that can happen is that we preserve that. The worst that we can happen is that we're all super time crunched and this is very alluring. And we leave our user with ungrounded information that's pleasing and plausible, but not necessarily what you should act on. And that the clinical claims that we've worked so hard to develop a methodology about over the course of the past 70 years, we cede over to a machine, right, trained on the internet. And it takes a lot of depth of understanding of the systems to really get at the gravity of that. But that's what I want to make sure in my work that we preserve. And what we optimize our systems for is making sure that what comes out the other side preserve valid knowledge and knowledge that we'd like to hand down to generations.
Christian, you have previously described AI as a smart enabler for professionals to improve their efficiency. How does Wolters Kluwer's role shift from delivering services to enabling this kind of AI-augmented workflow?
Yeah, I think it's really important to build this transition on how we are sort of increasing the efficiency of what Sheila just said about the importance of the base of that content and all the clinical knowledge that has been built across the years. So I think assuming that all clinical thinking and interpretation of evidence base can be augmented through AI, we can really see blossoming of use cases. The first one is really to make more efficient what has been the clinical decision support use case historically. If you think just on a basic case like making a differential diagnosis, in the past there might have been multiple access to the same platform to ask for different type of disease and trying to understand what were the symptoms and possibly the diagnosis. And now the machine can help you to make a comparison table of all the different potential diagnoses associated to that symptom. So that is already an efficiency gain that is dramatic, and our expert AI users are telling to us that is a big gain of efficiency. So I'm just going with that basic example, but I think it's the starting point. But then you can start thinking in the future that if you attach to that the patient information or embedding into the workflow of an EMR, so you can combine the clinical intelligence with the patient information, you can really be more precise in the type of assessment that you do. And then you can start building what everybody says, the agent that can help sort of activating some specific action. That is like you can think about activating some prescription that are recommended or thinking about clinical documentation. That is also a big efficiency gain in the future, but all on the base of having a set of content that it's really trustable to activate this efficiency.
Sheila, for a clinician facing a mountain of alerts and data, what does this intelligence layer look like in practice? How does it actually reduce cognitive workload rather than add into it?
That is also a great question. The power of the technology is really its synthetic ability, and that's what we need to concentrate on. I think the cognitive overload doesn't necessarily come from too much information or the synthesis of information alone. When I think about even my career over the past 22 years, there was continuity with patient care that was through the relationship of a doctor and a patient. I had a panel of patients. I knew them well. I knew their personalities. I saw them when they needed to go to the hospital. We would send them to the hospital. Sometimes I would go over with them. Sometimes you would meet them there. Sometimes you would walk them up to their room, right? And tell them what would happen next. And that relationship really guarded the continuity. And I think early in training, that was absolutely huge for us. This before the work hour rules. I mean, you learn in 36-hour stints sometimes what continuity really was, and how to manage a patient from their whole entirety of their history through an acute phase that happened in 36 hours. And as medicine has grown, that continuity is lost. The information that we need is fragmented across different people, fragmented across different systems. So a patient history may be with one provider, it may be in urgent care, it may be a little bit in a retail pharmacy, it may be scattered in bits and pieces in the EHR. You may have some of it, but not necessarily all of it. It may be in some specialist heads in a different way than another one. We now have ancillary staff supporting us, and it may be that they have different backgrounds and different knowledges. And then there's a growing amount of medical literature and data on top of this and scientific trials. And all of that is in different spaces and different moments in time. And the job of the physician has become to integrate that system instead of really to think about what needs to happen for that patient and that person. So there's a whole new cognitive burden that has entered the field. So the best thing that this technology can do, and I think why it's so beautifully alluring, is that it synthesizes things. And really for us to dramatically enhance the workflow, I don't think it's the small efficiency gains, though those help. It really is for us to think about the workflow of the future and not so much the workflow of the past. And when I just talked about that sort of landscape, the workflow of the future is for the technology to be able to synthesize that continuity back into a single experience that can be shared across providers so that there's now a shared understanding of a patient profile for a clinician, a specialist, a PA. And I think that's also the power of this technology, is that it can take the same information, synthesize it, and make it understandable to people with different backgrounds, different understandings, inclusive of the patient themselves. When we think about workflow traditionally, it really is set up for that one physician to be the sole accountable person in this. So if we keep the workflow of the past, but simply layer on AI or new capabilities, that's not a finite space. That is a finite cognitive space for that one person to deal with. But if we keep introducing new layers and new point solutions into that, I think it will add to the cognitive burden rather than reduce it. So I think re-envisioning the workflow with AI and what this technology is meant to do, and what does the workflow look like when there's new providers in there, when there's complexity and when things are fragmented, is what moves us forward.
Okay, from a content perspective, what are the practical steps to validate an AI's output? Can you give us an example of what that validation process looks like in terms of specifically reliability and accountability?
It's so zeitgeist, right? This is like talk of the town recently. And I think we've been working really, really hard to make sure that we're presenting what is valid information for use. And then I think our team has been thinking really specifically about how we safeguard that and ensure that we optimize our system to produce something that's valid. Our North Star is the information that comes out of our system, valid and appropriate for use. And the way we've structured this is to break it down into 4 questions. One is the knowledge that comes out of our AI system preserving clinical intent. Is it faithful to its source? And is it mapped to what a point of care user would need? vis-a-vis any particular question. And to do that, one, we have a human subject matter expert review. So people who are very knowledgeable in their field simply look at and judge the answers. The second, which is becoming, part and parcel of the industry, is the development of rubrics. A rubric is a question with a set of criteria that represent discrete elements of a good answer to that question. You may weight them in importance or the degree to which they would cause harm if omitted or changed or altered in some way. But that gives us a predefined standard that we can use to evaluate the system. And for us, we're lucky having the history behind us and the expertise to develop these and to develop them at scale. So we have about 30,000 criteria across 25 specialties in medicine that we routinely run through our system to make sure that the output of our system is what we expect it to be vis-a-vis specific point of care questions. And that takes a lot of knowledge to really develop those. The same sort of intent and minds that create content now create things that are like evaluation tools and processes so that we can really scale that expertise. The second question, and this goes back to your original one about evidence-based medicine, is we measure the integrity of knowledge. Is it grounded in the source? Did we retrieve the right sources that we think should be applied to this question? And then the next is an estimate of model knowledge use or any hallucination use. And I think that's really, really important in any clinical AI system. And for point of care decision making, you really want the information that a user is acting upon to be fit for purpose. You don't want a model to be interpreting a patient for interpreting a paper or a study for clinical care. That's where that whole history of evidence-based medicine and what is valid and what a disciplined approach to making a clinical claim is about. So one really important metric in my mind is use of model knowledge, and that's something that we measure. I think the third question that we ask ourselves, and this is what we do editorially now in our content, is we really go through great pains to predict the situation that a user will be in, give an answer so that they're there, so that they have it when they're there themselves, but also to predict the risks and the pitfalls. And we feel we have an inherent responsibility to predict error when it may occur. So we also have a process of predicting and quantifying errors within our system and checking for them before anything is launched, to push and pressure test the system to make sure that it doesn't break for edge cases and that it produces output that potentially averts any error that we can, with years of experience, predict it as might be risky. And then the last piece, the accountability. This is probably big in medicine, right? There's always someone who is accountable. So we do an audit of our work as part of that accountability. And we also look at all the feedback that comes in to ensure that what we're putting out meets the same standards that we validated internally. And of course, our obligation to our users in the community of medicine is always what it has been. So I think that's an important thing for anyone looking at any clinical AI system is, at the end of the day, who governs this? How do they measure it? And if something is untoward, how do you give feedback? Where does that feedback go? How is it acted upon? And what does that process look like?
Christian, what are the biggest concerns? And I don't want to sound down on AI, but there are concerns out there. What are the biggest concerns you're hearing from hospital systems and clinicians when it comes to trust in AI-generated insights? And how does Wolters Kluwer's 100-year legacy inform how you build trust with those customers?
I think here I'm going to cover several points that Sheila was just talking about, because I think all that model system is really a lot of answer to all the concern that hospital system might have when adopting AI. So I think today it's a very dual dynamic, right? A lot of excitement both from the vendor and the hospital setting to really adopt the new technology, but at the same time, particularly when you're talking about the buyer and the C-level committee that need to make decision, be concerned. Concern that might vary by geographies, right? Because we are delivering our clinical decision support up to date across the globe in 190 countries. So some of the biggest fear might vary by region. But let me start telling to you the biggest one. So in some cases, like in UK, when we are start discussing with our existing customers to test up-to-date expert AI, we receive sometimes a Excel file with hundreds of questions, which we need to answer to make the clinical government and C-level committee that needs to decide on the adoption that they are making the right choice. The bucket varies, can be very related to how do we ensure that the answer we are providing is safe, and others bucket that are really relevant in some geographies, particularly European Union, is related to the regulation, how this is respecting patient information and GDPR, how much is respecting local regulation about data sovereignty, or how much is respecting software as a medical device, or if there is a software medical device. So really a big span of question that the hospital needs to answer, and they are not prepared even. They are building the question on the fly because it's everything moving so fast that it's really varying by hospital and by state. What are we doing? I think it's really what Sheila was explaining before. So we have been building our brand based on being the safe and trust solution for professionals. So it's all about being right. Our tagline has been for years, when you have to be right. So that is in our DNA. But what we are trying and what we're doing today, it's really being able to build that safeguards to help the customer to understand what we're doing to reduce the risk of hallucination. I think building a lot of guardrail around the traceability, quality measures. And then I think what is really important and resonating well with our user and buyers is what we call the transparent feedback loop that we were discussing before. So if there is something that is not working, really having, and it's relevant for patient safety, having a really strong and quick feedback loop with our clinical team on top of the predictive measure that Sheila was saying.
Sheila, you've previously discussed the fragmented patient journey. What gives you hope that AI can bring a shared, comprehensive understanding of what a patient needs?
What gives me hope? I think the nature of the technology itself is just simply designed to do that, right? I think it's a breakthrough technology. Its rate of adoption gives me hope. I think I shared this anecdote before, but as you ask this question, it comes to mind. My husband is a teacher, and he's seen his students using AI tools to help them understand what he says. He teaches something that's very complex in chemistry, and its ability, right, to make information interpretable, the same information interpretable to different people, gives me hope, because the precise issues with fragmentation, the ability to synthesize fragments back into a whole is what it does. And the ability to, change the way that information is presented so that different people can interpret it is what it does. I think the other thing that gives me hope is the hybrid leaders of the future, those clinicians who know technology and who also know medicine, who can look at that and say, right, that these are the qualities of good in this technology, and these are the gaps. And here is how we're going to fill those gaps with structured reasoning, with clinical logic, with validation machinery, to make sure that we can take what's good, the huge potential out of this, and transform it into something new. So those are the nature of the technology, the magnitude of the problem. I teach at Harvard Med, and the engagement of the next generation with this in a really meaningful way. And also my ability here to bring up and grow hybrid leaders who understand that picture is the things that give me hope. So I think this is eminently possible, but we're at choice, right? I think we've got to go forward with intentionality and deliberateness, and with the right thing in mind, that ultimately this technology will shape how people interact with patients and will shape how clinicians reason. So we have to have the right North Star, which is making sure that the knowledge that comes out the other side of the system is valid and appropriate for clinical use.
As we look to, say, the next 5 years, how does Wolters Kluwer continue to be a credible voice in this discussion? What is the key message you want healthcare professionals to take away from this discussion?
I think what I would love is, and what I see for the future, is that we're the evolving gold standard for medical knowledge. There is a way to, and I think we're calling this, our clinical intelligence model, which is we've been the guardians of sound knowledge for clinical action for years. And we evolved that through an editorial process. And now we're evolving and we're doing the same thing, and we're setting the new standard for what good knowledge is in the AI era, using the same expertise, but in an entirely new way with an entirely new technology. So in years to come, I think we're that same gold standard, but that gold standard is now embedded and encoded into a system that creates knowledge. I mean, that's our clinical intelligence model. And my hope is that same intelligence that has served to take, good care of patients and be an advocate for what providers need for years, and just now simply becomes part and parcel of, various AI systems that require a clinical brain, either in the foreground or behind the scenes.
Yeah, and from my point of view, thinking about what has happened until now for up to date, which has been such an exciting journey, which any physician will say it's like always to have the best second opinion clinical expert next to me to take a complex decision. That has been happening until today and is still happening. And in the expert world, I hear a lot of time healthcare professional telling us, yes, I might have gone to some AI tool, but then I want to check if it's right, up to date. So what I would like them to take away is that that gold standards actually can just get better, can become more pervasive for all the clinical workforce and help in what has been always our mission to reduce variability of care using the latest evidence to have a better outcome. I think we have never been in a better position to deliver better experience and augment our impact. And then from an international standpoint, for market outside the US has never been so exciting to deliver better through local language and enhance our capability with the clinical intelligence layers to add local nuances because the evidence base is one, but sometimes there are nuances for different type of patient around the world. So that is really an exciting time for us.
Sheila Bond, Christian Cella, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. You're very cool.